All right. Welcome back to the show. We are back to back today. We move from a very high level board meeting into much more deep technical. It is my bread and butter, application security and cloud security. Andrew, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on the very nice fireside chat. Hopefully, it's not. Be careful, it might be too cold, too hot. Sorry, I had to make the joke. But Andrew, tell us a little bit more about you. How did you get into your role right now? What are you doing right now? And how did you get into what you do today?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Andrew Panell. I'm the application security lead at a company called Gett. So we are a taxi app based in Israel and the UK. I've been working in security for about 12 years now. So I kind of started as a pen tester. I started attending OWASP events and seeing appsec kind of growing more and more of a job rather than kind of on the side. And I found that when I was pen testing, I would find the same problems over and over again.
Right.
And I wanted to kind of fix some of that stuff and actually, it's a bit of a cliche, but shift left and fix things before they got to production and try and fix and be defensive and be more proactive in terms of security. So involved in OWASP, I'm an OWASP chapter leader, and now I've been doing appsec for maybe last 4 or 5 years now.
Right, and we talked with Sam yesterday about OWASP London. Which chapter do you lead?
I lead the Newcastle chapter in the northeast of England.
Brilliant. And how you see the attendance in OWASP have changed your kind of perspective on security? Have it helped, improved? I'm a big supporter of OWASP, big passionate about it. So I always like to shout out.
Yeah, so I've led the chapter for about 5 years now, and when we started, it was very focused on pen testing on the offensive side of OWASP.
Right.
And there was maybe 15 to 20, typical pen testers, very socially awkward, and I said that as an ex-pen tester. Whereas now we are collecting maybe 100 people,
right?
Across the mix of decision makers, technical people, more appsec people. So appsec in the last 4 or 5 years has massively grown. I think it's an industry, and we're seeing more focus on appsec becoming more of a professionality. And so I think that there is more focus on appsec. And when the pen tester rolls a report, we need someone to kind of sit between the developers and to almost translate what that pen test means in terms of product security.
Right, and I think that's quite important to actually move and transition from security and application security. It's not just pen testing. There is much more fun in actually finding the problem, and it's much more difficult to actually go there and helping an organization to fix, convince them that that's important. It takes a massive amount of skill. So not if you're a pen tester, consider a transition in purple team because it's a good exercise of, I found the hole, but then how you fix it is a whole nature and it can open up a whole nature.
Yeah, and I found that especially when I started moving toward appsec, my mentality as pen testers, why don't you just fix this,
Right.
Like this is simple, just patch this piece of software, it's a third-party dependency, just bump the version. And then you speak to developers and like, well, I've only got a limited amount of time, I've got a limited amount of story points, and actually, it looks like this one service needs bumping, but when I bump that one thing, that one service is, well, microservices now, it's going to affect 100 different services, which I need to have integration, units, acceptance testing. So you kind of appreciate how difficult it is when you move from pen testing to appsec, have to fix things. It's much more of a challenge, and I think a lot of pen testers, if you've not had that development role, realize.
Yeah, and I think back in the days when it was just pure patching, and even in just patching, you still need to do unit testing and stress testing. Maybe we don't see that side of the testing because we get already the patch, already tested and deployed. AppSec is a little bit more challenging because you need to go through that life cycle. It's a change, like any other change. And if you haven't been on the other side, you can't really understand or perceive that challenge.
And I think like IT security and app security are quite different. So in IT security and an end user, you update their Windows machine and find they may not be able to use it for an hour.
Right.
It's not the end of the world, right? But if you're talking about a high availability app that 99 and 5 nines, like if that service is down for an hour, people are going to be asking why that service is down, and pointing the finger towards why is security patching this. It's not been tested. It's causing financial loss to the company because orders can't go through or customers can't be serviced. I think that mentality is very, very different. I think that's where AppSec kind of comes into its own, and it's a lot about having conversations with people. There's a very much human element of it.
Yeah, and I think it's quite a transition. I think we've seen more job in AppSec and people getting much more involved. Um, there's been a debate recently on LinkedIn on is a role of an AppSec or a role of security just technical? What do you think?
Um, I don't think so. I think that the benefit that I bring, and I think a lot of AppSec and a lot of security people are now bringing, is security used to be siloed. It used to be under IT, and they work alone, they do updates or whatever. Whereas now, I think it's a lot about collaboration across teams. So you've got DevOps, you've got Dev Infra, you've got the developers and engineers building the actual software itself, and then you've got kind of security sat somewhere in the middle, translating technical requirements to product managers to understand why they need to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
When you're building, again, shift left, but when you're building functionality, make sure you're including security in that process. You're thinking about what you're doing and becoming more involved. So, like AppSec is almost like a translation piece between the tight security requirements and the product. And again, security is always that balance, but I think AppSec is doing quite well at kind of meeting those balances.
Yeah, and I think it's all about, as you rightfully said, it's creating that balance. It's translating a technical message that is pure, okay, go fix stuff, into, okay, maybe let's balance, maybe let's dedicate 5 story point or 2 story point a sprint to actually fix stuff. Maybe something will fit those story point, maybe something not. But it's treating team, I believe, with their responsibility and like adults.
Yes.
Like you give a problem and you let them decide how to do it rather than stuff it down their throat, please fix stuff.
Yeah, and security, and especially AppSec, has become more of a guidance role rather than an enforcement role. So when you tell people not to do something, like they quickly overcome it and realize there's workarounds. Whereas when you kind of guardrail them and hold their hand a little bit more and engage with like developers, I think they appreciate it, respect you a little bit more, but then come forward more often. They actively speak to you. I think maybe 50% of my time is spent in meetings, talking to architects, developers, engineers about what's the best way of doing this, and then they remember that design pattern or anti-pattern depending on what we're building, and then in future they don't come back with that same question. So I like the idea of security champions, where we're kind of engaging more developers to be security aware, do more security things, and I think like having these conversations with people makes a huge difference.
No, it's brilliant. And in your days, you moved from pen testing to AppSec to now building AppSec program. How would you give suggestion to other AppSec people that want to move in their role to actually build application security at scale? What are the steps that you would suggest, and to which degree also to shoot?
So I think it depends, but inevitably you're not going to have the resources of like the developers. Have maybe one AppSec person per 20 to 100 developers. Mm-hmm. So you need to think about some automation around how you detect those security vulnerabilities, and how you manage those in terms of prioritizing some of that work. You can't fix everything all the time, a lot of the time. So you need to be able to understand, what should I fix? What should I maybe risk accept or delay? Quantify some of that risk around why we're doing what we're doing, and understand how things fit together as well. In terms of growing AppSec, that kind of security champions program, if you can't hire dedicated application security people, works quite well. Is in you kind of evangelize security, you get other people to evangelize it for you, and then you kind of present it upwards. So I talk to my CISO on a regular, once a week, to kind of explain what's the posture of the application security, what we're focusing on this week or this month or this quarter. So a lot of engagement, a lot of talking, and a lot of automated tooling to try and I'm only one person, I can only dedicate so much time. So the more we can automate some of this stuff, the better for me.
So it's about automation, but it's also about trust and relationship. You can't replace the human.
Yeah.
It's always about I don't know. I talk about application security people as salesmen.
Yeah.
We have to sell the idea to the various team on instead of moving into please can you patch and upgrade this, is building that emotional intelligence, building that rapport with every product manager, project manager, and then agreeing on a methodology that is going to be different from everybody. So that's why it's a challenging role, but agreeing on measuring KPI that are the same stuff that they report on up.
Yeah, and if you're just giving someone a Jira ticket, there's no rapport there. There's no incentive to fix things. Maybe there's a fixed timeline, fine, but you're not actively engaging people and caring about security, and that's where like this, this active conversations and explaining why people should care, explaining the story points, and I think that makes developers become more proactive and helps AppSec do our job better. Yeah.
Right. And if it's, as an AppSec, we traditionally get frustrated because things don't move along.
Yeah.
And sometimes questioning, is this really important for the developer? Do they even have the story point to actually dedicate on looking at this? And sometimes they don't. If it's not important for their boss, line manager or product owner, it's never going to be important for them. So
Yeah.
I think from an AppSec program, I really like where you're going. That it's stringing along the KPI and making the metrics that the product owner care about.
Yes.
Really important for everybody. Maybe a mandate from the board, and the board level can dictate. Okay, from now on, security is one of the priority of the
Yes.
product team, and we need to do at least a little bit every time or every month. And that message, a simple message, I think, will be very powerful.
And I've worked in companies where absolutely pace is really important of delivering features, delivering products. So they're deploying to the back end, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times a day.
Right.
And I think it's really difficult as an AppSec person to become involved in that. You can't pen test every single little feature change, right? You can't do one big pen test at the end of the year and be comfortable with that fast pace. So I think being involved as an AppSec person with the development team, making sure they have in their heads, when I'm designing X, Y, and Z, I need to think about security, given those patterns, given the architect's patterns, and then having a monthly engagement or however you plan those story points is super important to keep the business moving, but to keep it secure as well.
And I really like the point that you brought up. There are a lot of changes, and some team actually do 100 releases per day.
Yeah.
And not all of them, maybe they're just a flick of a comma or a word in a UI. Maybe not all of them are actually worth to take a look at.
Absolutely.
But there are some things that it's worth to look at. And if you build a relationship with the dev team, they actually bring it to you.
Yes.
Not a full lot, but just the one that actually you really care about. And that's the development champion program then.
Yeah, I think that them being proactive and caring about security means that I don't have to review every code request because I don't need to, because otherwise that's all I would be doing all day. But secondly, I provide guidance. So if you're changing authorization, authentication, if you're dealing with customer data, you should probably involve me or just let me read over, what the changes you're making just on a high level, so that do I need to read this code? Do we need to run up more automation around security? I think that's super important. That otherwise you become stretched so thin that you offer little value, you get burned out, and I think that's a real problem.
And I think burnout is a really, really common trait and problem. I've faced it myself. I've seen my team actually burning out over time. And if you don't approach this with skill and automation, and with mindful that you can get home with a minute of time by saying, I'm the security person, all your problem now is yours.
Yeah.
If you don't build that expectation, you quickly remove trust on yourself and burn out very quickly, because all of a sudden you get taken over.
And you get that alert fatigue, right? So you're running 20 tools, everything's telling you everything's on fire. Where do you start? How do you prioritize that? I think that's sometimes overwhelming when people come to AppSec, and especially as I've seen a lot of developers move into security, and they the first thing they find, I don't know, is they do a Google search, they find some credentials on a bucket somewhere, and they're like, this is on fire, this is on fire. And it's like, well, actually, this is a developer key which doesn't allow access to production, so actually we should rotate that key, but it's not as bad as a production key leak. So context is massively important to everything we identify, everything we find, all of the tools we run.
Right, context is king. Looking at the business context, both the deployment context, is absolutely key. It's one of our favorite topics here.
Yeah.
But I think it's difficult to look at organization overall unless you have a very ingrained AppSec person. And even in that case, it's difficult to look at a report or look at 50 reports of 200 pages each and say, okay, maybe we look at that particular line because.
Yeah, and especially when you're looking at what are a load of low risk vulnerabilities. Individually, they may not be important, right? But what an attacker will do is chain those together, and that thing that provides a little bit of a story around actually some of these. As an industry, we always focus on the critical and high risk vulnerabilities, and they are important. But what an attacker may do is chain a few things together, which we historically may not patch. So I think again, context around some of these vulnerabilities, some of these findings, it's hugely important. And being able to like negotiate stuff down where like stuff isn't connected to the internet. So, or you need access to a box already. So maybe that critical isn't as critical, but also the other way around where loads of loads can be chained together. Maybe that's a little bit more important and we need to fix those.
Yeah. And I think as security professional, we always get bogged down by reading report and get burned out and don't have even the mental space to actually look at, okay, this and this actually can be chained together. And that's where I think human overtake automation. You can have all the simulation possible, but only a human eye can correlate things.
Appsec Phoenix. Fix vulnerabilities today before attackers exploit them tomorrow.